Namaskar. Reclaiming reality. The reason we are here today is because of one podcast which has been circulated on various groups. Last week, I was able to listen to that. The title of the podcast was Too Much Bhoga, the Mystic Tantra and Karma Leads to Kashmir's Collapse. The podcast was hosted by Prana Stories, and in that, when we look at deeper assertions made by Dr. Shadavdini Sri Ganeshji, especially on the claims about Kashmir Shaivism and Advaita Vedanta's role in shaping martial spirit, we will also explore the profound impact such narratives have on an already beleaguered Kashmiri Pandit community and the broader implications of cultural misappropriation. With us, I have today Shekharji, Ramachandra Shekharji. Welcome, Shekharji, to the program.
धन्यवाद
Shekharji
राकेश
has been associated with our team, Code Sharda team, for I would say more than 8 years now, from the time when we did the first Sharda Lipi codes session during, I think, with the Vyoma Labs. So, Shekharji, let's pick up where Stavdini Ganeshji suggested that Kashmir Shaivism and Tantric mysticism, with their emphasis on aesthetics and what he considered non heroic kavyas, led to the loss of collective consciousness among Kashmiri Pandits, ultimately making them vulnerable to Muslim invaders. Can you please elaborate on why this interpretation of Kashmir Shaivism is problematic and perhaps a misreading of its fundamental tenets?
राकेश जी thank you for inviting. At the outset, I like to make it very clear that we all respect the great scholarship of Shatabdani Ganesh,
Absolutely.
but to disagree is also an integral part of the Vada tradition of the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara. So here it is critical point, and it's where a significant misrepresentation occurs. To understand Kashmir Shaivism, we have to recognize its core philosophy, which is the unwavering affirmation of the world.
Yeah.
And unlike certain interpretations of Advaita Vedanta, which often characterize the world as mithya or illusory, the Kashmir Shaivism sees the universe or the prapancha or the srishti not as an illusion. If it is illusion, it has to be transcended. But Kashmir sees it as real, dynamic, and most importantly, a joyful manifestation of Parashiva himself, the highest and utmost reality recognized in the tradition.
The play of Lord Shiva himself.
Exactly. So, this school of thought, Kashmir Shaivism, is the name by which it is getting referred. Trika is probably the appropriate terminology to
Absolutely.
refer to it.
Yeah.
So, this is not an otherworldly philosophy. It is, in fact, profoundly this worldly philosophy.
Mm.
And this stands in stark contrast to Advaita's Vivartavada, which posits an apparent transformation,
Absolutely.
implying that the world is not ultimately real.
Yeah.
So, if we define rooted in reality, an expression which was used in the podcast, as embracing and engaging with the tangible world, then Kashmir Shaivism, which perceives the entire cosmos as a vibrant play of Shiva Shakti, a real
Yeah.
expression of the divine, is arguably more rooted in reality. It's about all about experiencing the divinity in the world and not escaping from it. Moreover, the Kashmir Shaivism offers a path that does not demand renunciation. So it will be very, very rare to come across any acharya within the tradition who was a sannyasi.
Absolutely.
Rather, it actively integrates the worldly enjoyment, bhukti, with spiritual liberation, mukti. It encourages individuals to live as householders, fully engaged with their lives and responsibilities, while
Absolutely.
simultaneously practicing the Shiva Yoga, the path of the self realization.
Realization.
So, what happens is that the emphasis is on Kriya, on action. And this emphasis on Kriya in the process of self recognition is key here. It asserts that the knowledge is not inert. It must, for that matter, Shiva himself is not inert here. He is
Absolutely.
endowed with the absolute agency. So, this knowledge must be put to action in order to lead to true awareness. Therefore, to sum up, this makes it an extremely practical and actionable philosophy, which is deeply applicable to daily life.
Absolutely.
So, uh, the assertions such
Yeah.
as, or the notions such as an overdose of such philosophy leads to detachment, disengagement, and even loss of warrior spirit is simply not supported by its foundational principles, is what we can say.
Yeah. So,
Fact?
so yeah. So the philosophy itself, what as you're explaining, it itself encourages engagement, right? We are not talking about detachment here. We are not talking about something which is not real, right? So how
Correct.
does it disconnect to the criticism of Tantra? Because here, see, Ganesh suggests that the Tantra pursuit of exoteric experiments and siddhis, which he clearly explains, that leads scholars to completely ignore what's happening around them. So what was happening around them in at that particular time when we talk about 8th century or 9th century. So is this an appropriate portrayal of Tantra's historic role? But
So, before even answering this question, let's make, I would just want to make one more point clear
Mhm.
here. When we use the word Tantra within our system, Tantra stands as a corpus, a knowledge corpus, which also includes the Agamas.
Absolutely.
Because the fact that the entire Tantra and the Agamic literature was disseminated or was brought down to the world by Lord Shiva through his five phases. Fact which is asserted by multiple sources. And Malini Vijayottara's opening verse itself says, Parameshwar Mukhodbhuta, Jnana Chandra Marichaya. So, Tantra and the Agama are treated, but the subtle difference being that certain Tantras, exactly 28, are classified as the Rudra Agamas and the Shiva Agamas, and the 64 are classified as the Bhairavagamas.
Bhairavanas.
Normally, the Tantra falls under the Bhairavagama category. So, coming to the question,
Yeah,
so this, that is, whether this is an accurate portrayal of Tantra's historical role, this is another area where a selective lens distorts the historical reality.
yeah,
Because just like the Agama, the Tantra was far from an isolating or a purely esoteric pursuit. In fact, it was intrinsically linked to the revolutionary thought. More so, it attracted powerful individuals, including prominent rulers of medieval India, precisely because of its promise of worldly as well as the spiritual power. So, this appeal for a tangible temporal benefit, the power, protection, prosperity, it directly contradicts the idea of it promoting detachment from societal or even political realities. And epigraphically, when we study the period between 500 to 1500 Common Era,
absolutely.
it is characterized by a lot of political turbulence,
Turmoils. Yeah,
but at the same time, rise of several new kingdoms. And it also saw the Tantra and Agama gaining immense prominence during this period. So the rulers very actively patronized these traditions. Several rulers, there are countless examples. I just take a example of Rajasimha Pallava.
Mhm.
In one of his virudas, no, the sobriquets or the titles that he assumed, praises himself as Agama Priya. One is fond of Agam. So this patronage clearly demonstrates a deep connection between the Tantragama and the state power, indicating its perceived utility in maintaining and expanding temporal authority also.
Mhm.
The great Rajaraja Chola, he
Absolutely.
got the Shiva Diksha, and he mentions his Shaiva Diksha Nama as Shivapada Shekhara. He was not an isolated example. His son and several others have got
Absolutely.
the Dikshas, and the images of 100 plus Shaivacharyas can be found in the Darasuram temple, which is near Kumbhakonam. So, this tantric or the agamic religious specialists were not mere hermits. They were actively involved in
Various
addressing,
also.
yeah, critical state issues.
Yeah.
And we have again several references from the Madhya Desha and the Radha Desha, which is the Bengal region, where they have addressed issues like drought, epidemics, and even war
Mm.
using the Tantra and Agama prescriptions. For that matter, the Shaiva Tantric texts even explicitly detail the war magic. No, it's called as the Yuddha Prayogas
Uh-huh.
and rituals specifically designed for protection and subduing adversaries, and therefore ensuring the victory to the king. So, this integration of practices into royal administration, military strategy speaks volumes about the Tantragama's practical worldly engagement, not disengagement.
Absolutely.
Even Acharya Abhinav Gupta, whom Sri Shatavdhani Ganesh very acknowledges as a profound scholar of aesthetics, Shaiva philosophy, and Tantra, he thrived during a period of remarkable peace and prosperous Kashmir. So, when you reverse engineer, if Tantra or Agama or Kashmir Shaivism, which is a distillation of the philosophy of the Tantra Agamas, were inherently detrimental to society's well being or its stability or its ability to defend itself, can such intellectual and artistic flourishing would have been possible?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the very existence of such profound philosophical and literary output during a period of stability suggests that these traditions were not the cause of vulnerability, but rather a part of a flourishing civilization.
Mm.
Therefore, my opinion, to attribute Kashmir's decline to an overdose of Tantra is a convenient but historically inaccurate simplification.
So, Shekharji, this leads us to a key comparison made by see Ganeshji. The contrast with South India, right? He credits figures like Vidyaranya from the Shankara Advait tradition with fostering a various spirit and enabling a survival of powerful kingdoms like Vijayanagara. Is it accurate to say that Advait Vedanta alone accounts to these martial traditions, or there is something more complex picture? What do you say about it?
Uh, Rakeshji, I think a part of it we tried to cover
Yeah,
previously also, but just to
absolutely.
take this as specific example. So this narrative, though highlighting Vidyaranya Acharya's undeniable importance, significantly understates or entirely overlooks the equally, if not more, the vital role played by the Shaiva Siddhanta Acharyas, who belong to the Tantragama traditions, in the martial history and political stability of South India.
Mhm.
So the Shaiva Siddhanta is a sophisticated philosophical system which draws from the Rudra and the Shivagamas.
Shivagamas.
And the origin of these, the philosophical origins, once again comes from the Kashmir scholars like Bhattarama Bhattanarayana Kantha, whose Vyakhyanas, okay, gave or paved the way for the later development of the Shaiva Siddhanta. So Shaiva tradition has to be understood in its full glory to understand the historical significance of the Shaiva Agama and the Tantra in the entire political and cultural landscape of India. So this school is mm, it's not merely an esoteric school, but it is a comprehensive spiritual path that emphasizes practical spirituality and harmoniously integrates doctrines from both the Vedas and the Agamas.
Yeah,
And unlike the interpretations that emphasize renunciation, Shaiva Siddhanta posits that the Anu or the soul or Jivatma gains experience and purifies itself through actions in the world
absolutely.
by
Yeah.
earning what is called as a Shiva Punyam,
Mm.
highlighting an inherently world affirming and action oriented philosophy. Many of us would be surprised to know that the great Paramara king, Bhoja, who ruled over the Madhya Pradesh, we have a huge statue of Bhoja
Pooja.
in the middle of Bhopal,
Bhopal.
the lake in
Yes.
Bhopal. Bhoja was a very prolific Shaiva Siddhanta scholar. He authored a text by name Tattva Prakasha, which
Hmm.
is considered to be one of the 8 seminal texts of Shaiva Siddhanta, and it is read and commented by several Shaivacharyas as deep as in the South India.
I see.
So Shaiva Siddhanta, as such, the Tantra Agama, okay, as such, is an action-oriented philosophy, is what we are trying to emphasize time and again through all these examples.
Yeah,
So historically, the Shaiva Siddhanta was instrumental in the re-emergence of the powerful states, including the Tamil states, the Vijayanagara state, and
absolutely.
the Pandyas and the Pallavas also. And the Shaivite saints are credited with challenging and overcoming the influence of Buddhism and the Jainism in the region, spearheading bhakti, which was not just a spiritual revival, but it was a cultural and political assertive movement as well.
Absolutely.
So this demonstrates that the Tantragama tradition derived and other traditions which are derived from the Tantragamas were not passive, and they promoted a very strong spirit of preservation, defense, and cultural resurgence.
Mm.
And we have already seen several Rajagurus. Okay, for example, Ishana Shiva Gurudeva was the guru of Rajaraja Chola. Sarvashiva Pandita was the Rajaguru of Rajendra Chola. These two kings I'm mentioning uh, once again because they were successful, undefeated monarchs who led not only expeditions within India but commanded one of the most strongest naval fleet of their time, going as far as the Southeast Asia.
Absolutely. What we see. Yes.
Their Rajagurus were the Shaiva Siddhanta scholars,
Mm.
acknowledged multiple times in multiple inscriptions by both the kings. Not only that, the Hoysalas, the Chalukyas, and many other had powerful Shaiva spiritual advisors who played direct roles in state affairs, guiding rulers on matters of governance, warfare, and policy as well. And going back to the example of the podcast, which is most compelling example directly and countering Sri Ganesha, Shatadani Ganesh's assertion, is the very foundation of the Vijayanagara Empire itself.
Hmm.
So the Advaita scholars were present. The empire's establishment is significantly attributed to a Kalamukha Shivacharya by name Kriya Shakti Yatishwara. He was a Jangama Guru. Oh,
I
it's
see.
a sect within the Kalamukhas, a very powerful Siddhantagama sect in the southern part of India. So these Kalamukhas were prominent Shaiva ascetic lineage, renowned for their intellectual prowess and their service as Rajagurus to various influential dynasties, including Kakatiya dynasty. We have Rudramadevi's inscription, which asserts this. And they were significant predecessors to the Vijayanagara Empire in their military and administrative structures. because Vijayanagara takes off where Kakatiyas left. So this direct involvement of Shaiva spiritual leader in the founding of major defensive kingdom thoroughly refutes the idea that the tantric mysticism, okay,
Mhm.
led to withdrawal from worldly affair or a lack of martial spirit.
Yeah, yeah.
On the
So,
contrary, we can say that it showcases a deep symbiotic relationship between spiritual leadership and a robust political and military power.
yeah. Beyond philosophy, when we look here, Shekharji, see, Ganesha also criticizes the later poets in Kashmir. I think he very much elaborated about that, suggesting, yes, their focus was on romance and harem descriptions rather than upliftment of societies. They were not like Vyasa, Valmiki, and Kalidasa, which contributed, which he, in fact, says that they contributed to the decline of the society. What is your perspective on the purpose of Kashmir Cavias and these critics?
It's actually surprising because Ganesh is a versatile scholar, a poet himself, and a person whom we all look up to when it comes to literary criticism studies. But to say that uh, or to understand Sanskrit Kavya and its purpose and critiquing it in this particular manner, uh, especially in context of the Kashmirian Kavyas, somehow does not really go well with me because Sanskrit Kavya is a very sophisticated and multifaceted literary tradition which encompasses a vast range of themes, Shringara, okay, nature, heroism, devotion, philosophy, even historical chronicles.
Hmm.
Pioneering work was the Rajtarangini. So it's a tradition that celebrates aesthetics, emotional depth, and intellectual sophistication. The flourishing of such diverse and refined literary forms is often considered as a hallmark of a prosperous and stable civilization, indicative of cultural maturity and intellectual vibrancy, not necessarily a symptom or a precursor to societal weakness.
Don't fall of weakness. Yeah.
To even suggest that the poet's not explicitly writing resurrection of society, okay, narratives, were somehow therefore contributing to decline, is, in my opinion, imposing a singular anachronistic expectation on a rich literary tradition of Kashmir. Kalidasa, who, whom Sri Ganesh also praises for inspiring people, who is respected across um, uh, the entire landscape of Bharat, also extensively explored themes of love, separation, and beauty of nature. When we study his works such as Abhigyan Shakuntala or Meghaduta, it becomes very clear. So this demonstrates that even greatest poets celebrated for their epic or heroic narratives
Mhm.
engage with broad spectrum of human experience and emotion. And the Kavya tradition, by its very nature, explores the human condition in all its complexity. Romantic and aesthetic themes, therefore, are integral to it.
Mhm.
And Kashmir, throughout its history, possessed an extraordinary rich literary heritage. Scholars such as Mamadacharya, who was a towering figure in poetics, who followed Acharya Abhinavagupta,
Kalhana.
and Kalhana,
Yeah.
who chronicled and penned the Rajatarangini. So I don't think we have anywhere else where Rajatarangini or an historical work is
Absolutely.
followed through by another historical work and continued till much later because Rajatarangini of Kalhana is known. It was followed by Jonaraja's Rajatarangini also. Then there came the third version of Rajatarangini. And there
Absolutely.
was even a fourth version which unfortunately we are unable to trace, which which covers a period after 1750,
Yeah.
probably because of the political situation in Kashmir. Uh, we were unable to lay our hands on the manuscript. So, this historical documentation, which the tradition which started with Rajatarangani, and Kalhana meticulously documented the lives of the kings, the political events, and various societal aspects of Kashmir, and it was considered to be unbiased. So, it is a historical chronicle. It engages with realities of its time, provides insights into political and social landscape. So, this intellectual vibrancy, along with the aesthetic flourishing, were, in my opinion, products of a period of relative prosperity and intellectual freedom, and not necessarily the cause of its
Yeah.
eventual
Decline.
decline.
Decline. Yeah.
Yeah. So, to even reduce the complexity of Kashmir's history to a perceived deficiency in its literary themes is again a gross oversimplification.
Yeah.
So, we all know that the people who have really studied the history of Kashmir, we all know that the decline was a consequence of a complex and multifaceted factors, right? Uh, Political instability. There were a lot of internal strifes. There were very many external invasions. The entire landscape itself was so difficult, a terrain,
Absolutely.
which made it almost impossible for movement of troops across the from the plains, kind of things.
Yeah.
Therefore, exerting a lot of economic pressure. So these factors extend far beyond philosophical or aesthetic pursuits.
Yeah.
Is my opinion.
Shekharji, this deeper dive provides a crucial context here. But beyond the academic, I think we have spoken about beyond the academic arguments. How does such narratives, what we have seen in this podcast, which attributes to the decline of Kashmir to its own indigenous philosophical and culture tradition, impacts the Kashmiri Pandit, I will say my community today. You mentioned about the dilemma, right? What our community is facing today. What do you say about it?
So, Rakesh ji, this is exactly the reason which actually prompted our initial conversation to come up
Absolutely.
with this conversation at all.
Yeah.
Otherwise, historical inaccuracies and all those things are part and parcel of uh, literary outpourings which we come
Absolutely.
across. But this aspect, how does it affect the psyche of an entire community? That is very, very important.
That too in the
And
stage where they're already in dilemma.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is perhaps the most painful and dangerous aspect of such narratives.
Yeah.
Uh, the Kashmir Pandit community have already suffered forced displacement, genocide, which is not recognized as a genocide,
Yeah.
and the decimation of their ancient homeland. So, in this context, such remarks cannot become just points of academic debates.
Absolutely.
No, it's a form of a cultural gaslighting. So, the dilemma of Kashmir Pandit community is multifaceted, and you and others will know much better. On
Absolutely.
one hand, they are community fighting for recognition of their unique heritage, their rightful place
Identity
in their
is
homeland,
in, yeah.
and justice for the historical atrocities. And on another hand, they are now confronted with narratives, often from within the broader Indic intellectual space,
Within our own
that,
country.
that essentially blame their own spiritual and intellectual traditions,
Absolutely.
that is Kashmir Shivism, Tantra, etc., for their misfortunes. So
Downfalls.
this narrative that paints, that paints their ancestral traditions as otherworldly, detrimental, lacking in warrior spirit. Sorry to say this, but it effectively adds insult to the injury.
Yeah.
Also, it undermines their resilience, the intellectual legacy, and their identity. And all this is not something which is merely a statement of chest thumping, right? It has been proved, the greatness of the philosophical or the literary traditions of Kashmir have been proved and accepted by scholars across generations. I would even say, which I had mentioned in one of my conversations earlier, that if Bhagavad Gita's shloka, which in a very different spiritual context, Urdhvamula Madhashakam,
Mhm.
where it represents an inverted banyan tree, were to be seen in the context of India, then it is true because we find the roots of great intellectual, literary, philosophical traditions flowing from Kashmir.
Totally.
So, uh, this such narratives, no, is flawed in my opinion, and this is an immense burden for a community which is already struggling with trauma and displacement.
Yeah.
Because uh, the young members of the community, it creates in them a sense of shame, a sense of inadequacy around their own traditions, rather than get them established or rooted into it. And these traditions are actually their cultural and spiritual identity.
Absolutely.
So when their philosophical roots are implicitly or explicitly blamed, it further fragments their sense of self or belonging. So we should look at this uh, not just as some kind of an historical misinterpretation. I'm not trying to put words into someone's mouth, but it's kind of a push towards cultural misappropriation by certain groups who
Right.
seek to assert the supremacy of Advaita Vedanta as a sole or primary Indic tradition responsible for martial prowess or the national strengths. This is the narrative we are seeing it get built, the over romanticism with the Neo Vedanta, starting with Swami Vivekananda. All due respects to these scholars, but are we at the same time recognizing the multicultural, multi-philosophical traditions of Bharata, which has
Of our
kept
country.
this land the way it is today?
Absolutely.
So, by framing Kashmir Shaivism or Tantra or Kashmir literary tradition as weakening or otherworldly, they are inadvertently or perhaps intentionally diminishing the contribution and validity of these equally rich and indigenous traditions.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, it is a subtle but an insidious way of saying your traditions are not good enough. Embrace ours if you want to be strong,
Yeah.
right? So this approach marginalizes the non-Advaitic traditions and communities,
Yeah.
therefore denying their historical agency and cultural contributions. But this homogenization will not work, Rakeshji.
Yeah.
This
No, I
this entire Advaita-centered narrative is not fair representation of Bharat in its vast colors.
I think yes, Shekharji, you rightly pointed, like you have been part of the team, and we, like when as me as an individual, when I am talking to my community and trying to bring a sense of pride in the community with talking about all the manuscript, talking about all the Kashmiri Shaivism, all the acharyas, and where at the time where the community is dispersed and we are struggling for our existence, I think these narratives, I would say, yes, they are not in the right spirit. But yes, Shekharji, this was a really, I would say, most powerful and essential perspective which you brought. It underscores how academic discussions can have very real world consequences, particularly, as I said, for the communities who have already endured so much. And thank you, Shekharji. I really humbly appreciate you coming out and shedding light on many aspects, whether it is on the historic aspect, the philosophical aspects, and the contemporary aspects of these narratives. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
धन्यवाद धन्यवाद
Namaskar.
नमस्ते